Greetings investors, Halcylion here. Welcome to another board meeting, the 7th one to be exact. The more this series kept going, the more I learned about manipulating situations, enemies, and even my own allies to ensure I always come out on top. But my mission is not yet complete, so let's not waste any more time on trivialities. There's much work to be done. In the previous episode, I was planning to conquer the entire eastern steppe, but my own Battanian compatriots decided to put a spoke in my wheels, and I had to take care of that problem. But I made the best of it and eventually purchased a big stretch of Khuzait land from the Khan himself, and now, here we are, with peace declared between our factions. I could take advantage of this peace and purchase the rest of the continent, but I have the strength to just take what remains of it by force. So that's my plan for today. Before the violence starts, however, we must first solve a few minor issues, the first of which is companion personal development. Yakim got the attention she deserved and focused on skills that would make her a better general or governor. As for the others, they just got a few random focus and perk points assigned to make them slightly better than they were before. Nothing special. I also sent my younger sister to lead a party of her own, but because we're too far apart to give her my soldiers, she'd have to recruit people herself. Last but not least, I have taken a moment to inspect the political landscape of Calradia and find out that the Khuzaits still hold 7 forts, while Battania controls several cities and castles. In time I would deal with both of these factions, but I could not formally declare war on either. My council was against it, and because influence is a precious resource, I decided to attack Monchug without any provocation. This in turn would force the Khuzaits to declare war on us, which is exactly what I want. When I approached Monchug this time, he had a problem to take care of and I wanted to find out more, but he reminded me that our relations are too strained for him to share his personal problems with me. Understandable. Surrender or die. Under normal circumstances I would not engage the Khuzaits in an open field, but seeing how they're outnumbered and I am leading a cavalry retinue, these are anything but normal circumstances. I shall tell you all I can about this battle, but honestly, I can't say I needed to use any advanced tactics. I moved all my units into position and once we were ready, I ordered them all to follow their sergeants. If you're expecting an epic battle, this is not what you're looking for, because it wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. But if you wanted to gaze upon an army of horsemen in all its glory, well, enjoy the view. But I could not let my cavalry do all the work, so I pitched in and cut down a few enemies as well, one of which happened to be Alijin, the Khan's daughter. My falcons cut straight through her armor and she was slain in one swift strike. No one is safe from death's cold embrace, not even those of noble blood, and these things tend to happen on the battlefield. At the very least, she earned a warrior's death. The battle was over in 3 minutes and 33 seconds, and we only lost 13 of our warriors. At the end of the battle, every one of the enemy generals were released, with the exception of the Khan himself. Our relations are beyond repair anyway, so the best I can do for him is throwing him into a dungeon for a few days. But because of a mistake I made, I ended up with more prisoners than I could manage and Monchug slipped away. Oh well. I also need to mention that after the battle, the prisoners liberated from Monchug joined my ranks, even though my party was full. Some of my own prisoners offered to join as well, and they were also recruited, and together, I sent these lads off into a warband led by my new companion, Garayan. Hopefully he'll patrol the area and catch straggling Khuzait parties. Speaking of stragglers, Mina of House Varos was caught by one of my vassals. I joined in as well, and after her party was crushed, I could have imprisoned her, but I chose to let her go and I gained some positive relations with her clan. An irrelevant detail. Or is it? With the Khan's warband scattered, I was finally ready to do something I've been planning for a long time. If you remember, towards the end of my first corporate report, I said, this is all part of my play, which you'll see when the time comes. The time has come and I must meet Caladog to get this done. He wasn't too far off, and when we finally talked, I asked him, hypothetically, how much money would he want if he were to sell me all of his towns and castles. And he jokingly said, no more than 12.5 million dinars. We shook on it and in one fell swoop, most of the Battanian territories were handed over to Halcorp. A déjà vu, in a way. A war with Britannia is inevitably coming, and when that happens, we'll have an excuse to seize the rest of their towns, but for now, let's focus on taking what's left of the steppe. 7 castles, that's all they have left. Hopefully, some of my vassals can assemble armies and lead sieges of their own, so I won't have to do it all by myself. On our way towards the first castle, me and my cavalry ran into some smaller enemy parties, and thanks to our speed, we caught up and decimated each and every one of them. These battles were nothing more than glorified bandit hunts, and because they weren't all that interesting, I won't go into any details, but while we're on this subject, you're about to find out why I named my javelins Assassin. You see, my corporation is big enough, we don't really need any other clans to join us. I mean, I'll still try to recruit any who cross my path, but if they refuse to join, I must eliminate them. And sure, I can just ride around, catch these lords and chop their fucking heads off, but executing an unarmed noble is considered a war crime and it reflects badly on my honor. Between you and me, I am not an honorable person, but the people of Calradia view me as such, and each beheading is a PR nightmare. So I can't just allow personal grudges to stain the image of my corporation. But as my friend Morenon demonstrated a few years ago, on the battlefield, accidents can happen, and with my personal involvement, those accidents can result in neutralizing an enemy lord without the PR shitstorm that comes with executions. So every time we ran into an enemy warband, I personally took part in each battle and rode forth to make accidents happen. That's what my javelin is for. And you want to know why I named it Assassin? That's why. 1 shot, 1 kill, 1 high-value target eliminated. Except Meritor did not die from that shot. I hit him in the arm and he instantly went into shock. But he's still breathing. Mission failed. We'll get him next time. Well, I can't execute him, but I will release him after the battle, and maybe down the line, he'll forgive my murder attempt and join my organization. To be honest, most of my assassination attempts failed, and I wasted my time joining these field battles when my soldiers could have handled everything by themselves. Well, one of these guys died, but not by my hands. Not before long, we reached the first of these Crusade forts, Kimley Castle. Before I even approached the walls, I made sure to call some of my rich vassals to me, first because I wanted to sell them each fief I conquer, and secondly because I needed more soldiers. As we prepared the siege camp, more and more Crusades showed up to this castle's defense, and when a sizable army made its presence known, I felt something stirring, so I decided to call for more reinforcements. The plan was to bombard the castle so we wouldn't have to climb ladders to get to the defenders. When reinforcements arrived, the enemies scattered like rats and we had free rein to continue the bombardment, which lasted for almost a week. When the walls collapsed, we rushed in to kill the defenders and take this fort. First thing I've done was remove my trebuchets from the battlefield since they can't hit the enemy anyway, and then I remembered how the siege of Chiaz proceeded and we used pretty much the same tactics. Infantry divisions 1 and 3 formed a shield wall, archer divisions 2 and 4 spread out, and Division 8, my companions, were ordered to retreat. Those of us that stayed moved onto the left flank and prepared to step into the breach. Then, just like in Chiaz, my infantry division charged at the foe. The cavalry division was ordered to flank the enemy shield wall, and the 2 archer divisions were instructed to occupy key positions inside the walls from which to rain arrows upon the defenders. As for myself, I assassinated some of their infantry, and when the enemy archers ran from their tower, they were decimated by my own fire. This was a rather easy assault, not gonna lie, and what we've done here is the blueprint for how the rest of the castles will be taken. Not all of our sieges will follow this exact blueprint, but that's how most of our battles will go from now on. Once this castle was taken, it was immediately sold to Hurunag, along with a castle that was taken by another one of my vassals, and I got paid 1.2 million dinars. Needless to say, that's how I'll be making my money from now on. But in the event your vassals aren't that rich, you can feel free to take one of their fiefs instead, when you screw them over with this maneuver. Isn't it just great to be able to sell fiefs? Although in the future I predict it'll be much harder to work for this perk. I was then planning to move towards the next castle, but just as I left this one, I spotted a party bearing Joron's banner, and if memory serves, he's the leader of a prominent ex-imperial clan, so I disbanded my army and took off after him. When I said I don't need any more clans in my corporation, I meant it, but at the same time, I wanted to permanently remove this clan from the Khuzait roster, and since murder isn't really an option, recruitment is my only viable method of chipping away at the enemy's forces. Joron joined us, but he wanted something in return, and since he can't afford a castle, he was instead given 2 of my assassin javelins. It was a lot cheaper than the lowest amount of money I could give him, but I primarily want to keep these special weapons for myself. I might have to craft some collector javelins in the future, not because I need to make money, but because I need smaller bartering chips to trade with these lords. After this, I took a glance at the diplomatic situation. We greatly outnumber the Khuzaites, we have 22 more prisoners than they do, we've inflicted slightly fewer casualties and raided 2 fewer villages than they have, but we've also successfully seized 2 of their castles, whereas they've taken none of ours, and yet, if I want to make peace, I'm supposed to pay them tribute, even though I have the advantage. Yeah, right. That's never gonna happen, and if I catch one of my vassals trying to force me into paying tribute to this rabble, he'll get excommunicated from the organization. Anyway, it was time for the next siege, so I reassembled my army, a bit smaller this time since there weren't so many enemies around. And then we gathered around the walls of Usek Castle and we put together a little picnic, as we prepared to serenade the defenders inside with a song of fire and blood. While the trebs were built, I was notified that our corp claimed Simira Castle, and as you can expect, I promptly sold it to Gyarios for about $500,000. Actually, you know what? Every time a fief is taken, you can assume it was either sold to one of my vassals or exchanged for one of their other fiefs. So if you're curious how the war reflected on my personal wealth, keep an eye on this corner from time to time. Oh, and shortly after that sale, Battania declared war on us, as expected. Unlike last time, I won't try to push for peace. I will instead allow my vassals to take their land for ourselves. But returning to the current subject, the assault on Usek wasn't too different from the previous one, but it did not follow the blueprint. This time around I left 1 infantry division and 1 archer division on the right flank, and I've done the same on the left, and they were ordered to charge simultaneously. The assault was over in a couple of minutes, much faster than we've previously done it, but we also took twice as many casualties, so overall this wasn't a good trade-off. From now on, I would follow the blueprint and try not to lose as many people. As for my personal performance, I took some unnecessary risks that nearly got me killed, but in the end I got out of that bind and vented my anger on the runners. Well, to be entirely honest, I had no anger to speak of. I just calmly used them as training dummies to develop my athletic skills. Once this fort was taken, it was sold, and then I took my army north, where 2 more castles await the Halcorp treatment. Kaisar, my current target, and Dinar, which is actually besieged by Aeron. I hope Aeron pulls through, I don't want to waste another week bombarding that one. When I arrived to Kaisar, I noticed 13 enemy lords were taking refuge inside its walls, which would soon crumble under constant bombardment. They'll order an evac if they know what's good for them. While my siege camp was being set up, however, something disappointed me. Aeron abandoned the siege of Fort Dinar, which means I would now have to take it myself. As for the siege, nothing noteworthy. It was conducted according to standard procedure, which, by the way, is a term I'm very fond of, its meaning changing depending on the context. There's one standard procedure for a disposable army composition, and another standard procedure when implementing the Arrow Storm doctrine. Now that I'm with my cavalry, the standard procedure is to crack the walls, penetrate the left flank, and steadily wipe out everyone inside. I didn't let my men do everything, I joined in on the killing, and within 5 minutes, this castle was added to the collection. And the defending lords? Most of them got imprisoned by my vassals, but those who surrendered to me personally were released. Most of these guys were generals of mercenary companies which all joined me at various points throughout my campaign. If they had any sense, they'd have been on the other side of this wall. Well, Aeron gave me no choice but to besiege Dinar Castle, but fortunately it's just a stone's throw away. And just like in Kaisar, it hosted many enemy lords which, this time, fled for their lives as soon as they spotted my army approach. When this happened, I dismissed my vassals from the army, hoping they'd give chase to the enemies and catch them, but they chose to walk in the opposite direction. I briefly considered calling them back, but in the end, I decided to let them roam the steppe, and in their stead, I summoned lords that were much farther away. As this stronghold was being bombarded, something strange happened. Someone declared war on me, not a kingdom and not a minor faction either, but a legitimate clan. Varos. If you remember, earlier I attacked one of theirs, but I let her go. And now they've decided to wage war upon me? Well, in that case, every time I meet the Varos on the battlefield, I'll go out of my way to ensure that accidents happen. Anyway, shortly after this strange occurrence, we proceeded with the assault, which was conducted according to... you guessed it! This one was even easier since 70 defenders perished in the bombardment. And even though I made some mistakes and suffered some injuries, I can proudly state that I maintained consciousness till the end of the battle, which was over within 3 minutes and claimed the lives of only 21 of our soldiers. Since my vassals proved to be quite active in this war, I assumed this was the last castle to be taken from the Khanate, but I was wrong. There was another one left. Just one. We do it according to standard procedure and then we can wipe the Khuzaits from our list of enemies. At least that's what I thought before I arrived there and saw that the entirety of the Khanate stood ready to defend it. My scouts reported that at least 50 Khuzait lords took refuge inside this castle. Their retinues are small, between 10 to 20 soldiers each, but when there's 50 lords inside, that quickly adds up to over 1,000 defenders, each and every one ready to fight to their last breath to defend their homeland. Except this isn't their homeland, no. Most of them are mercenaries who foolishly threw their lives away for Khuzait gold, and they're currently occupying an imperial fort. My fort. This is nothing more than a group of bandits who are squatting in my goddamn castle. So I need to call a lot more banners if I hope to expunge them from this place. Up to this point, the only reasons I had for bombarding castles instead of assaulting the walls were the following. Number 1, I wanted to minimize my casualties, and number 2, I was hoping my vassals would take some fiefs by their own volition while time passes and 90-kilogram stones fly towards my targets. But now, none of those reasons apply because bombardment isn't just one of many options. It is my only option because if we don't demolish these walls and we somehow still manage to win, I predict a death toll in the thousands on my side. So I called as many vassals as I could, built the siege camp, and then constructed 4 trebuchets which were deployed simultaneously as to deal maximum damage. Throughout the bombardment, some of our trebs were destroyed and in their stead, I built a couple of catapults which would be deployed during the actual assault. The bombardment lasted for 10 days and by the time the walls were cracked, 80 of the defenders perished. But I could not drag this siege on because the enemy's food stores are full and ours are not. So inevitably, I ordered the assault to begin. And even though the balance of power looks like this, the battle would be difficult and I couldn't let my soldiers do their own devices. Everyone was ordered to move on the right flank, the infantry divisions formed a shield wall and the archers gave each other room. And for a while we just held that position while our rangers shot at the enemy. I also tried sniping some foes on the walls and I mostly missed, eventually running out of arrows. But I really wanted that archer dead, so from the ground I picked up an arrow that he shot at me and I sent it back to him, right between the eyes. Because I wanted to keep shooting, I searched for quivers dropped by my fallen archers and when I refilled my ammo, I was not going to do any sniping. Turns out I'm quite terrible at that. So I instead harassed the infantry line, shooting arrows in their knees. I also neutralized some enemy archers from inside the walls, and when my arrows ran out, I ordered the infantry to charge. As for myself, I had no intention of fighting in the front line, so I moved towards the left flank, and I ordered my secondary infantry division to hold this position. In the very next second, I got cornered by a pack of wolves, but my falcons struck them down. From here, my plan was to go behind the enemy infantry and cut them down one by one. They fought back and I even got chased off by a group of 3 enemies who were killed as soon as I got room to swing my falcons. One of these guys was a prominent member of the Wolfskins named Lid. This mercenary company could have joined me instead of throwing their lives away for the Khuzaits, but they made their choice and Lid paid with his life. When this was done, I returned to the killing grounds and put my falcons to work, cutting enemies down one after the other, and 4 enemy generals tasted the bite of my sword, the Khan's sons among them. After witnessing all that carnage, the surviving enemies lost their temper and fled for their lives, and once we were firmly planted inside the walls of this castle, I ordered most of my troops to hold various positions in the courtyard while the infantry continued their charge. I followed them and eventually we arrived at the main gate, where I carved a path through the enemy to open up another entry point into the castle. Once the hostiles were cleared from this sector, I ordered my troops to regroup while I made my way up the wall and then atop an archer tower, intending to position my archers here. But for some reason that was not possible, so I continued across the ramparts until I came across a huge group of enemy archers. I couldn't hope to defeat them all by myself, so I ordered my infantry to press on, while one of the archer divisions was positioned on the ramparts. My shield helped me survive the enemy arrows until the infantry closed in, and once that happened, I've gone back into the thick of it, but after a while, too much of my infantry crowded the ramparts and I couldn't swing my weapon effectively, so I switched to my bow and tried shooting anyone not wearing my collars. I even scored a few kills, but as the walls cleared, my infantry pressed the attack. More and more enemy reinforcements arrived, and after a while, enemy archers started swarming my position on the walls. They came, one after the other, and they all fell before me. My falx has never spilt as much blood as it did today, but for every enemy I've slain, 2 more would take his place, and eventually I was overwhelmed and retreated to the archer division I placed here. Because of the overcrowding, they can't properly use their ranged weapons, so they did what they could with their swords. Before doing anything else, I gave my other archer division free rein to do whatever they feel is appropriate, and when I felt confident, I went right back to killing. My falx sliced and diced the defenders until I was drenched in their blood, but eventually, due to the sweat in my eyes, the ringing in my ears, the physical exertion and the chaos of the situation, my bloodlust clouded my judgment for just 1 second and I made the wrong call. I advanced towards the enemy without backup and a wolf seized that opportunity and knocked me out. He must have hit me with the back of his axe because the last thing I heard before blacking out was a whack. But the fighting wasn't done yet, not even close. I don't know everything that happened after I passed out, but from what I could piece together from the stories of my warriors, it went a little like this. My archers kept fighting, and with the help of Lucian, they cleared this troublesome portion of the wall, and they kept going across the ramparts towards the next group of enemies. More foes tried making their way up the wall, but Lucian told them no, so they complied. From the retelling of one of my Khan's guards, Lucian's group made its way towards the last group of enemies who held their position at the other breach, and whatever remained of my archer division flanked them from behind, but eventually my guys got pushed back. This last enemy position was in some sort of tunnel, and the only thing left to do for my warriors was to push through. But since I wasn't there to command them, my boys did not have the inspiration to take the same route as Lucian's division and flank from behind, so the soldiers butchered each other at the breach. The defenders slayed many of my men, but I had a lot more bodies than they did, and it didn't take long for the survivors to reach that same conclusion, and when they realized their situation is hopeless, they took to their heels and ran. The resistance was toppled and my victory against the Khuzait Khanate was complete. The castle was mine, but before I did anything else, I had to inspect the battle report and see how it all went. Before the assault began, you might recall that I predicted a death toll in the thousands if I don't bombard the walls, so I did just that and still lost over 700 soldiers in that siege. Granted, 400 of them are merely injured and will eventually recover, but if we were defeated, we'd have all faced imprisonment. As for the enemies, 500 lay dead, another 450 are wounded, and 60 of them had the common sense to just run away. Smart boys. In this battle I've personally slain 64 enemies, which is the most I've ever downed in a single fight. Technically speaking, I had a higher kill count when I used my decimator in the slaughter of Sibir, but that wasn't much of a fight. Just industrial grade killing. This time I actually had to fight for my life. When the dust settled, we found out 4 of the enemy generals were killed. Lid of the Wolfskins, whom I personally slain, Kaidomenos of the Embers, leader of his clan, Ilatar, leader of his clan, and Vipon, leader and sole member of his clan. I did warn him about this and he still backed the Khuzaits. What a foolish mistake he made. Somehow not one of my generals or companions perished in this siege, which is quite a pleasant surprise. After the battle, the enemy generals who surrendered to me were allowed to leave, while the rest of them were imprisoned in the dungeon of this castle. The Odrissa Carnage was the last major battle of this entire campaign, and the Khuzaits have been removed from power. I should mention that while we were busy bombarding this castle, some of my more ambitious vassals waged war against whatever remained of Battania and conquered most of their lands by themselves. By the time I was done, only Zionica and Fort Usank remained under their domain, and I was planning to pay them both a visit and take them for myself and finally accomplish my ultimate goal. Anyway, many days and irrelevant details later, I arrived near Zionica, which was already being sieged by one of my Sturgian vassals, Idrun. I was planning to join in the assault as soon as daylight broke, but for some reason, the army abandoned that siege and left it all to me. Oh well, what's another siege? Because I didn't want to bother in the actual assault, I prepared yet another bombardment according to today's standard procedure. And I should mention that while all this was happening, another one of my armies captured Usank Castle, which means Zionica is the last fief not yet under my control. Once the walls were cracked, the battle started. For a while, me and my archers shot at the defenders on the walls, and finally I landed some shots myself, but not long after, I got bored of that and sent the infantry in. I personally climbed into an archer tower intent on shooting the defenders, but I had no targets, so I descended, and by the time I reached the main gate, the fighting was already over. Well, what did you expect? This town's defenses were already softened up by Idrun. My assault was merely the last nail in the coffin. This battle lasted for no more than 5 minutes, but it took this long only because of the waiting we've done at the start. As the city fell, Bechstein surrendered to me, and because I could use another Battanian clan in my corp, I let him go. Fen Uvain used to be ruled by Meladir, who rejected my offer twice already, but old age claimed his life, so now the clan is ruled by Kulharn. I hope this lad has more sense than his father. I should also mention that after a week of constant bombardment, prices of goods in town increased, so I made a sale and reached level 237 in trade. A mostly irrelevant detail which is meant to highlight how difficult it's become to develop this skill. But I don't need to develop it anymore. I don't need to do anything at all because my ultimate goal has finally been achieved and the entire continent of Calradia is under the direct control of the Halcylion Corporation and its subsidiaries. I dragged that sentence out, didn't I? Of course I did, because such a monumental achievement cannot go uncelebrated. Almost 14 years after my journey began, more precisely, in the 10th day of winter of 1097, the whole world was united under my banner. Interestingly enough, half of this time was spent setting up my finances, my credibility as a merchant, and my corporation, before I unleashed the full might of my trade empire upon the false monarchs that plagued this land with their wars and devastation. Now it is time for peace and prosperity, growth and industry, innovation and trade. And if any dare threaten the stability of our land, they shall meet their end. I could drag this on, but I believe that was all I had to say on the subject. But just because the world has been conquered, does not mean my work is over. Far from it. I will still have to share this domain with my other vassals, administrate my lands to ensure their prosperity, and quell any rebellions that might endanger the lives of my subjects. Many of these Calradian lords may have been removed from power, but in their anger they will raid their former settlements and put their civilian compatriots to the sword. But the whole world is their enemy and they won't last long. And despite their hostilities, I will offer them a chance at redemption and recruit them into my organization. Those who refuse declare themselves enemies of the state and shall be hunted down and brought to justice. But that comes in the future. For now, my plan was to reunite with my wife and then make our way to Hellcorp HQ. But in my way I saw Ergeon, a Battanian clan leader who would make a fine addition to my ranks. So I disbanded the army and set my horsemen upon him. When we caught up, he feared I might kill him, but as luck would have it, he's more useful to me alive than dead, so I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. When the inevitable happened, I sold him a castle on the outskirts of Battania, for which he paid almost 300k. A fine deal which resulted in Hellcorp gaining one more subsidiary. After that, I made my way towards Ostican to pick up my wife back into my party. If you remember, she was left to govern the city while I was off to war. I didn't want her to pointlessly lose her life in one of the many sieges we've been through. As days went by, I also noticed an increase in my daily revenue due to all the fiefs under my personal management. The income would fluctuate, 55k in one day, 60k in another, and I even peaked at 70k. This money would be used to further develop my towns and castles and generally improve the lives of my subjects. Eventually I reached Ostican and was reunited with Chalia, and together we set off towards Battania. When I reached the homeland, I saw a few Battanian lords patrolling their former lands. Coolharn was immediately made the offer to join, and without hesitation he accepted. And I also happened upon Aradwir, who shared the same fate. Coolharn had the funds to buy one of my castles, but this other guy was kinda poor, so he accepted a monetary transfer. I've not done much since then. I reached Seonon, organized my soldiers a little, and after that, I was pretty much done. One more quick look-see at the political situation told me the following. Battania is in utter ruins and no threat to me and my organization, except probably for several peasants, and if I wanted to make peace, I would have to pay them a small tribute of several thousand dinars. Yeah, right. The Khuzaites have 1077 soldiers, which coincidentally was the number of days that passed at the beginning of this chapter since my journey began. But even though they're the largest military force besides my own, they are severely outnumbered and outclassed, and even so, they have the audacity of asking for 22,000 dinars per day in tribute. Look, Monchug, you're in no position to make such outrageous demands, and if you insist, you might find yourself heading towards a situation you won't like to be in. Vlandia, although reduced to 250 people, is still in open rebellion, and they also demand tribute if they are to cease the hostilities. I'd rather not give Der Thurt anything, because while we're in conflict, he cannot hope to recruit any soldiers to fight for him. He might have had a chance to rebuild his army, but he's been a raider all his life, and the people of these villages have a good memory. They're finally free from his tyranny, and there's no chance any of them would want him as a leader after he put the civilian population to the sword. Me? I've kept my hands clean. No villages were raided by me personally, although I can't say the same about my subsidiaries. I did attack one group of villagers long ago, because that was the only way to provoke the war I needed to establish my corporation, but other than that, no civilians were harmed by my unstoppable war machines. That I know of. As for executions, I haven't done any so far. I didn't need to. But it is difficult to recruit people to your cause when you're nothing but a murderer, and to be entirely honest, I couldn't have achieved this all by myself. Maybe I could have, but it would have taken too long, and my path proved to be more effective not only in uniting the whole world under one banner, but also in minimizing the lives that were lost. Tens of thousands at least died in my war, but how many more would have joined the pile of corpses if I didn't intervene? Hundreds of thousands? Millions? My wars lasted for no more than 8 years, and now that this is done, the killings have stopped for the most part. Without Halcorp intervention, Calradia would have been torn apart by war for decades, centuries even. And this victory was achieved without war crimes on my part. And now the land is at peace. But who even knows if this peace will last? Empires fall all the time, even modernized ones, and all my efforts might have been in vain. After all, humans are violent creatures who will find their way to conflict soon enough. The best I can do for them is put them all in their own place and hope they are content with all I've done for them, and all I'm still going to do. Anyway, I'm done pondering. While still analyzing the political situation, I came to the realization that only one faction didn't take action against me. Sturgia. Raganvand and his boyars never opposed me, not even once. Hopefully I can recruit some of them into my corporation and give their lands back. I'd give Raganvand the same option, but I have a feeling he'll refuse. Oh well. Before we end today's chapter, let's take a final look at our achievements. 37 million dinars in the bank, 15,000 influence, and a daily income of 45,000. This income would be much higher if my lands were directly under my control, but that would mean my vassals don't have anything. And if they don't have anything, why should they have any loyalty? That would get them to overthrow me, so I'm going to have to gather everyone and share this land as it should be shared. But that is an entirely different chapter, the epilogue to be exact. I hope to see you then. Thank you for watching and goodbye.